This video is sponsored by Slytherin. Thanks to them for making this video possible and for supporting the channel. Hello everyone and welcome to Field of Glory Empires, a new grand strategy game set in the classical era. This game in many ways has been pitching itself as somewhat of a rival to Imperator Rome, so we're going to go through the features and see what's on offer. Right, so Field of Glory Empires is a fully feature-rich campaign game that also features battles if you own Field of Glory 2. We'll cover how that works just a little bit later in the video, but for now, let's focus 100% on the campaign. In the Grand Campaign, you can play as any nation. These are broken down into 3 categories. There are 7 major factions, 21 remarkable factions, and about 50 other factions. The major and remarkable factions have the most interesting modifiers to set them apart from each other, as well as some objectives and unique types of government. The other factions don't necessarily have unique modifiers of their own, but they have different combinations of existing ones, and there's no limit on the amount. Some factions will have just 2, most have about 5, and some have as many as 8. And they can gain new ones and lose old ones as the campaign progresses through milestones and decisions. So for this video I thought it'd be best to take you through a little bit of my campaign so far and explain the gameplay mechanics as we go. Being quite original, I decided to play as Rome. Rome start at war with the Senones to the north, a warlike tribe eager to do some raiding on your borders. So Rome start with 3 regions on the map. Using the different map modes we can kind of flick between the ownership, population, loyalty and a bunch of others, but for now I'm going to leave it on ownership. We can see around us that we have the Etruscans to the north, the Samnites to the east, and Tarentum to the south, with a lot of independent areas in between. These are areas not controlled by any factions in game, but instead, they're basically independent. They have pops there, they can have defenses and even produce armies, but they're basically rebels and they're quite easy to conquer. So let's take a look at our global resources. We have gold, manpower, and metal. Gold is used for recruiting units, for paying their upkeep, and sometimes used for the upkeep of buildings. Manpower is used for recruiting units and also for paying their units' upkeep, and metal is used for recruitment of units and upkeep of heavy units. So the economy on the top bar is heavily geared towards military. However, each region has its own local economy, so let's take a look. So each region contributes to that global supply of gold, manpower, and metal, as well as a global culture rating, which we'll talk about in a moment. The main local economy is food, infrastructure, and equipment. So food is used to grow pops faster and supply the armies that are in your region. Infrastructure is used to build buildings faster and maintain the existing ones that are there. Interestingly, infrastructure actually stores over time, so if you don't build anything for a while, you can get a boost to production because of the accumulated infrastructure points. And finally, equipment is used to produce new military units. You can't produce a unit without it, so having a good income and stockpile is important to field new armies quickly. So those are all your resources. Regions also have a movement rating based on the terrain type, a defensiveness rating, a decadence rating, loyalty, and building slots. Then they have a population size, with the max size being 48. So let's talk buildings, and then we'll talk pops. Buildings are broken into 6 categories: agriculture, healthcare, infrastructure, military, commerce, and culture. Agriculture and healthcare help with producing food to grow pops faster and reducing the growth needed to get a new pop. They also sometimes provide resources. Infrastructure is used to both give regional benefits like roads for armies to march faster and buildings to produce infrastructure points. Military buildings allow for the production of some units, increase the speed of production, produce equipment, increase experience, or increase defenses like garrisons and walls. Commerce largely creates buildings that generate income, and culture creates buildings that increase your culture. Now, high culture ties to loyalty, which again, I'm saving to get to a little bit later. So this building system is quite unique in the fact that buildings don't cost money to produce, and you don't get to choose exactly what you want. Instead, one from each category is proposed, and you can choose to build it or not. If you really don't like any of the choices, you can reshuffle the proposals at the cost of a turn or 2. The buildings themselves will have certain benefits and drawbacks, usually at the cost of infrastructure, decadence, or money, and some buildings also require a resource to function, and this is where trade comes in. So trade is rather complicated. It's also automated, so it largely takes care of itself. Essentially, you can build any building you want if it gets proposed. A lot of buildings require some sort of trade good though, and without it the building will cost money to operate. With the good, it won't cost you anything. Now starting simple, let's look at the archery building. Archery provides equipment and it requires wool. The wool is currently being imported from a nearby region. If we remove the wool production from the other region, then we can see that our archery building now costs money to maintain. As well as this, some buildings also have a bonus for a certain good. This means that if you have a good present, you'll get a little bit of extra production out of the building, or sometimes something extra altogether. Like a basic example is a fishery. It produces fish, but if you happen to have sales as well in the region, then it'll also produce money. The automatic trades do not seek out the goods for bonuses, only for the needs. So bonuses are just something you have to manage to kind of obtain yourself if you can. So it's not the end of the world, but placing production buildings within range of the buildings that need them is a net benefit. Also, trading internally earns money on the export, but costs money on the import. Now, as it's all internal within your country anyway, the import cost is halved. So this means that basically you just make a little bit of extra money trading successfully. If you're trading externally, you'll earn the full amount on an export, but you'll also pay the full amount on an import. Now, as I said, this all happens automatically, so try not to be intimidated by it. It's actually pretty simple once you get into it, but you can definitely build smart to get the most out of it. Once you start growing in size, redeveloping regions as production and trade hubs earn you a lot of money, though as buildings are also randomized proposals, it's a little bit of a waiting game to get exactly what you want. You sort of have to make the best deal with the hand that you've been dealt. The next thing to look at with regions is population. There are two types of population, slaves and citizens. Now, slaves come from kind of winning battles and from the slave market, and citizens are the kind of natural pops that grow within your cities. These pops are going to have different ethnicities, which create different amounts of unrest. Also, the bigger your city, the more unrest it produces generally, which lowers the loyalty of the region and creates a revolt risk. This needs to be combated with culture buildings. Now, culture keeps the loyalty of a region high. So pop jobs are divided into 4 sections. Remember, there was 6 building sections. So growth and health are combined, infrastructure and military are combined, and commerce and culture are on their own. Citizens can work all 4 of these types of jobs, but slaves perform really badly if they work in commerce or culture, but they can still do it. Now, essentially, buildings will work just fine without pops working the line, but the pops that are assigned to the line will then increase the productivity. So for example, in Rome, with no pops working commerce, we still earn 77 gold. With 5 pops working commerce, we earn 115. So shifting them around doesn't really affect them. So if you need a big boost to infrastructure or growth because you're planning on building, or you just need a new pop fast, you can just pile the pops onto the area you need so long as you can sustain it. It's a nice way to redirect around your resources. And that's basically region management. Now, interestingly, when you start growing in size and you own 50% or more of the regions within a province, you can create a province to pool the resources together. And this is a really nice way to naturally ease the micromanagement as you grow. You can then actually automate the focus on buildings or the focus on pops, or do it separately or not at all. You can just micro it yourself if you don't want any automation. Now, let's get to recruitment and battles. Recruitment, as mentioned, will take manpower, metal, equipment, and gold just to produce units, and then it's going to require food, manpower, metal, and gold to maintain. So it really is a big strain on your economy, and it takes a lot to go right to get your armies built fast. Then, after producing a certain number of units, you'll start receiving a cost penalty, where each subsequent unit costs 25% more gold each time you recruit it, if it's the same type. So this is kind of to prevent unit spam of just one type. You cannot just keep spamming Legion over and over and over, because it keeps getting more expensive. So this means that you're forced to use more local troops. Every province in the game has at least one unique unit to recruit, so as your reliable units start becoming more and more expensive to recruit, the cheaper local units become more and more cost effective to use, even if it is just for defensive purposes. Something that I haven't really mentioned at all yet is that while Field of Glory Empires is a turn-based game, it's simultaneous turns, so all factions plan their moves all at the same time, and then they're all executed at the end of the turn. So when 2 armies are on the same region and at war, they have a battle. The battles in Empires are automated, though you can view a simple simulation of what's going on. Essentially, 2 lines meet, they skirmish, and then dice rolls based on the commander and strength of the unit are rolled to determine what happens between them. If the battle is a draw, it commences a second time until one side is the victor. If an ally is present, they fight alongside you at the same time under the strongest commander. Here's where it gets really interesting. If you own Field of Glory 2, which is a game from about 2 years ago that is just the battles, you can export your campaign battle to it and play it out there, and import the battle result back in. This does require 2 games to be installed, but it's actually a really quick process. Here's how it is in real time without any editing from me. So this was a battle I had against Italic Rebels at Picenum. You click export, the game closes down, it boots Field of Glory 2's launcher, you click play, and then in the menu of Field of Glory 2, you load your battle. Then you get a battle scenario that matches as best as it can what's happened in the campaign, and so far for me it's been pretty reliable. If I'm in mountainous terrain, there's tends to be mountains, rivers, things like that. It seems to reflect the battle maps as well as it can for a giant region tile. So here's the Italic Rebel force with lots of numbers but very weak troops as it was on the campaign. I eventually ground them down and sent them running. The goal of the battles is to rout about 60% of the enemy or to rout 40% more of them than you. Once the battle is over, you then basically do the import process but in reverse, and it'll load the result for you. Again, here it is without any editing from me. It's actually very quick to do. Now, hopping back into the battles just for a moment, Field of Glory 2 is something I covered about 2 years ago on my channel. I actually really enjoyed it. If you want an in-depth video on how the battles play, then please check that out. It'll be in the description of this video. Essentially, the battles are turn-based and have a limited number of turns. The game is all about positioning and morale, and it's quite realistic in that way, at least in its, representation of what's going on. Deploying on uneven ground or in rough terrain is a really bad idea. Wheeling cavalry around, or heavy cavalry around the flank especially, takes a lot of time because of each angle of rotation costs more and more action points. Then combat between units is calculated based on their strength, their quality, morale, terrain, the facing direction, and commander presence. So it really is quite a deep and immersive battle game, despite its, humble presentation. Now, I streamed it not that long ago, and I had a really great battle against the Etruscans, who dealt me a stinging blow. And I was really begging for my legions to hold out, but the numbers were just too much. It never ceases to amaze me how easy it is to form a connection to units once you can just see them. Seeing them fight when surrounded, run away, or die completely, it's just on a whole other level than it just being a campaign. And its realistic numbers really do add gravitas to the battles. Units represent pretty accurately numbers of troops, and it only takes about losing 10% or 20% of a unit totally for it to consider running away. More often than not, it's the speed of which they get cut down rather than the amount they lose which makes them waver, which is really cool. So that essentially is the Field of Glory 2 portion of the game. As I said, I did a full video on that, on just the battles a while back, so if you want to know more, please check that out. Now, if you don't have it, the battles still have some visual representation, but it's a lot simpler combat with just the 2 lines meeting and rolling dice. The last thing I want to mention is the government side of the empires. Now, in these panels, you can manage your global modifiers and your decisions. Now, decisions are going to be based on your circumstance at the time. They're almost like proposed laws in government. You can choose to buy or sell slaves, bolster your trade or religion, appoint a dictator, change the military, and deal with historical events with a variety of options. These can also impact your legacy. Now, legacy is the resource in the top right of the screen that I skipped over at the beginning. This is actually what all factions are striving towards. If you complete objectives and enact historical laws, you earn legacy points that move you up the rankings and closer to victory. Your government will give you objectives to complete, and doing so earns you legacy among other rewards. Now, as well as that, there's a progress and decadence mechanic at work. Essentially, the sum total of your culture versus the amount of towns you have is weighed up to give you a positive or negative. You're either advancing or regressing as a nation, and depending which way you're going, you're going to earn tokens. Now, if you get 5 of these tokens, you're going to progress or regress to a different form of government, changing how you handle your pops and your objectives. It's a pretty cool mechanic that's interwoven throughout region management. As you get more and more pops and grow bigger and bigger, decadence is harder to fight off. If you expand too rapidly into uncultured lands, for instance, without pops of your ethnicity, you're going to regress, causing more and more disloyalty and more risk of revolts. When you do grow at a steady pace, you'll have to keep shifting pops onto culture off of your main resource earning buildings, so it's kind of a hindrance mechanic to keep you from steamrolling a bit too much. At the end of your turn, cultural rank is judged against all other nations, so you can see how you're doing. Small city-states often pile on the culture, progressing them and enlightening them to a state of glory, bolstering their production and income levels, which really helps them out. And that's pretty much it for this look at Field of Glory Empires. The game comes with a 200-page PDF manual, so there's obviously a bit that I've skipped over here, but you can read the manual on their Steam page, so you can literally see everything about the game if you're interested. And don't worry, there's a pretty good in-game tooltip system as well, so you don't always have to rely on the manual. Now, the game does also feature asynchronous multiplayer where players play on their own time and upload their turns to a server. It's definitely a bit slower, but pretty fun watching all the turns perform at once you load back in and react to the situation at hand. And that is basically it. If you want to see a bit more from me on this game, just let me know in the comments and I may follow up this video with a full-on review. Thank you to Slytherin for sponsoring this video, and thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.